For years now, the Boko Haram terrorists have remained a top-tier threat to Nigeria, Africa's most populous country. The group's brutal campaign, which includes attacks on schools, villages and abductions, have claimed tens of thousands of lives and displaced millions of Nigerians, especially in the northern part of the country, particularly northeast. Through these years, Nigeria, with its neighbors, continued military offensives against this group to reclaim territories under siege. Successes recorded in these attacks have been limited as the insurgents still hold sway in several communities in the northeast region, especially Borno State. However, the war against Boko Haram recently took a new twist. 1,500 of them in Borno State have surrendered to the military authority. In the wake of the mass surrender of the insurgents, Governor of Borno State, Babagana Umara Zulum, says he is facing a dilemma over their reintegration into the wider society.
In a few months, we have started witnessing gradual return of peace to Borno State. Then we must commend the effort of the President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. We must commend the efforts of the Nigerian military, paramilitary, and our current civilian JTF and hunters.
What is the implication of this surrender? How best should the repentant terrorists be handled? Guests on Good Morning Nigeria will be giving their perspectives in a moment.
And indeed, we are, loaded with guests to discuss some of these questions raised. And joining us to talk about this, first let me introduce here in Abuja studio, Daniel Hassan Bola, legal practitioner, adjunct lecturer, and arbitrator, as well as analyst on legal affairs, both nationally and internationally. Bola, welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you for having me.
And also joining us from Jos is Brigadier General John Temlong, First Commander, Multinational Joint Task Force, former President of Alumni Association of National Defense College and Security Consultant. As always, it's a pleasure to have you join us.
Very much, it's a pleasure. Good morning, Nigeria.
And also joining us from Maiduguri is Kakashe Hulawan, Attorney General and Commissioner for Justice, Borno State. Glad to have you join us on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you for having me.
For 12 good years, Boko Haram has been raging in the northeastern part of Nigeria. And indeed, Jumai, the stories have not been so palatable all the while. Yeah. When you check the list, it has been not, beautiful to hear, but all the same, especially when those atrocities reached peak in 2014. Recall in April when the Chibok girls were abducted, and moving in around August, September, Goza fell, Bama fell. And then I remember also Madagali Michika, a movie along that line, specifically when we talk about movie, that one took place on the 29th day of October 2014. That's not mentioned in some of the atrocities talking about, the billions of naira of property and farmlands and produce that were destroyed by the, terrorists. And then the lives that went along with over 30,000 and 3 million of which have been displaced, some of whom are trying to find their feet to date. Now, these atrocities are not really going to go away so soon. And put together, we say, courtesy of the Buhari administration, this very group has been downgraded and now hitting a soft targets, which is, shrinking by the day. And recently, positively, I must say, some of them started surrendering to the government and then feeling that it's not a worthwhile venture now to keep fighting and fighting for no reason and killing people. And we had maybe 1,500 of them that have surrendered. Now, these are issues we are going to look at today, the dilemma of surrendering, these terrorists. Jumwe, it's been so hard a thing to really talk about, especially those of us coming from the Northeast.
Indeed. And, fortunately, all of us here in the studio are both from the northeast.
Yes, including Bola himself.
Yes,
really.
Daniel Bola, I would like to start with you. What is the implication of this surrender?
Well,
What do you make of it?
thank you for having me. There are quite a number of issues to look at. First, to look at the international dimension to it, which is, the international humanitarian law is what governs the principles of dealing with surrendered, armed bandits or terrorists. Let me put it this way, because why I'm saying there's a little bit of dilemma. Usually, under international humanitarian law, you have a situation where you have two warring factions, maybe the military of Nigeria and the military of another country, or freedom fighters or insurrectionists. So when you have a situation like that, you can readily apply the international humanitarian law decisively, comprehensively, and in a better way. But here we are dealing with terrorists that are not by themselves obedient to international conventions. So, for example, under international humanitarian law, if you take prisoners, you don't kill them. You don't deal with them. If you take an army that is injured or wounded, you don't deal with them. If you don't engage in the rape of women, abduction of people, both sides are obedient to those international principles. But in this case, it doesn't apply because the Boko Haram, in fact, do the very opposite of what the convention says. So usually when you find them coming to surrender, it will always have to be on your terms. Now, let's look at the facts. Did the Boko Haram suddenly just surrender because they are repentant in the real sense of the word? The answer is no. They suddenly decided to surrender because there is a hit on them. And then from their own section, they also have a problem between the ISWAP and the Boko Haram sect. After the death of the leader of Boko Haram, they now became downgraded, And the feeling that they cannot integrate successfully into the ISWAP, they don't have positions of power, they are not in a preferred position, now gave them the feeling that they are probably going to be in between the Nigerian army and the ISWAP. You are not free from the ISWAP, you are not free from the Nigerian army. So the best option they feel in the circumstance is to surrender to the government of Nigeria. The dilemma I have with the way the government of Nigeria is dealing with the situation stem from, and I share the opinion of the governor of Borno, stem from the fact that from the intelligence point of view, just because a group of people come together to say they are surrendering to the army and they are willing to drop their arms and then to obey the constitution and the laws of Nigeria, is not a conclusive proof that you will immediately integrate them into the society. That's the fear of the governor. From an intelligence standpoint, what you do is that you gather them together and then take them to detention camp, possibly outside of the northeast, where they share intelligence, where they are familiar with the territory, and where they are likely to be stigmatized, for example. So you take them out of the northeast to a place where it will become impracticable, if not difficult, for them to be able to share intelligence, assuming that they want to act as spies. Because you cannot rule the fact that history has taught us from the same sect of Boko Haram individuals that in the past were sort of taken out and we say they are repentant and we're trying to give them all the preferential treatment over and above the victims of this war, over and above the people whose families, loved ones were killed, maimed, and they will never have, their history back again as far as, the history of where they come from is concerned. So the government is having two difficulties. One, you're trying to give a treatment to a repentant insurgent over and above the victims of the war. And then in the second breath, your approach to it entirely may present an opportunity for them, assuming there are spies among them, to be sending informations to the people out there.
We'll come to that, Mr. Daniel.
Okay.
Let's join Kakashehu in Maiduguri. Kakashehu, you have been in the deep of this insurgency from the beginning, and you have always been somebody who have tried his best to make sure that the insurgents do not take over Maiduguri through support in whatever way you can. Can you tell us how this development, in the ongoing war against Boko Haram and the people in Maiduguri, what is the development and what is the implication of this surrendering of troops, insurgents to troops, and what is the Borno State government looking into it and how are they going to go about it?
you very much, Jumai. To start with, the government of Borno State, under the able leadership of His Excellency Professor Babagana Umar Azlim, welcome the idea of surrendering of sect members to the government of Nigeria. And on the other hand, we also have mixed reaction over the activities of the surrendered terrorists. Just like my learned friend over there, Daniel Bola, said, the government is faced with a dilemma. Dilemma in the sense that most of the victims of this insurgency are living in Borno State. And these repentant or surrendered terrorists are coming in the name of laying their arms to be reintegrated into the society. One, we are happy that they are surrendering, thereby reducing their powers and skimming down their ranks. On the other hand, we are faced with a situation where the residents of the state would find it very difficult in accepting this repentant Boko Haram to be in their midst from the onset. Now, what the governor is trying to do is to go on a high-level consultation, which he has started already. Yesterday, he was at the defense headquarters to see the chief of defense staff. He will also see the president of the country. He is going to engage traditional rulers, religious leaders, community leaders, and victims of this insurgency with a view to coming to a round table to see how best to treat these terrorists. The government of Nigeria, under the able leadership of President Muhammadu Buhari, prior to now has established what is known as Operation Safe Corridor. Now, the governor, being the chief security officer, is in the forefront of providing logistics, calling for these terrorists to lay down their arms in collaboration with the Nigerian military. The Nigerian military has the way advising both the government of Nigeria as well as government of Borno State on how to treat this matter when the high-level consultation is concluded. But for now, relatively, the state is calm and these terrorists kept on surrendering. This is the situation we are in here in Borno State now.
Many thanks, Kakashi Hulaun, Attorney General and Commissioner for Justice of Borno State. Let's move on to Jos and then hear from Brigadier General John Temlong, the first Commander Multinational Joint Task Force and President of the Alumni Association of National Defense College and Security Consultant as well. What do you make out of this surrender of this Boko Haram terrorist? And, you know, against the background of what Kaka said and what Boala said, the dilemma of the authorities in trying to deal with this situation?
Well, thank you very much. I want to go along with what Daniel Boala, the barrister, and Kaka said. The dilemma is there. It's not something new. Fortunately, when I was president of the Alumni Association of National Defense College, we envisaged this, and we held a national security seminar addressing these issues. That when what will happen at the end of the crisis? One, we need to reintegrate the citizens. Two, you need to look at transitional justice issues. Like what Kaka said is that the victims are there. So are you going to give them justice? They know some of those who gruesomely killed their relations, raped their parents, and made them homeless in their presence there. Are you guys going to integrate them? There are So we looked at the Rwandan situation, and where we found out that at the end of the Rwandan crisis, there was so much problem that they had. And even the judiciary that they had were not even enough to try those people. So they had they used what was called gachacha, their own traditional justice system. And so I think it's not something new. You are going to have that crisis. What is even bothering me the more is that these people said they surrendered, but did they come with their arms? If the 1,500 of them came out with their arms, or why did they lay down their arms? You know, we had such situations when I was there, where we had a set of their leadership that came and surrendered to me in Niger. I had to take them back to N'Djamena for the government to handle them, because that was part of our agreement that all surrendered rebels were to be handed over to their host countries. When you ask them where their weapons were, they said they left their weapons with the rest of the rebels who refused to surrender. And so that means that they still have arms and ammunition that could be used against the Nigerian state. Two is that you need to get intelligence from them. So what do you do? There is the Operation Safe Corridor that I said. You just don't reintegrate them immediately like that. No. You should take them to the camps there, isolate them, do a profiling of them to find out those who are the hardcore, those who are peripheral, and those who are forced into it. Separate them, and you get the intelligence that you want to get from them, and see how you are going to deal with them, because definitely you have to cater and think of those who are victims. You can imagine the parents of the Chibok girl that came along. She came with 2 children. You can see the trauma they went through. And even that is not even a joy, because the school of that girl has been truncated, and here she is coming with children out of a forced marriage. And that man might not even be somebody that she loved, it was forced. The problem is that she might not even stay with that person, and you have those children growing up without a father, or a father who the children will grow up stigmatized. There are so many of those young children too in Maiduguri and the northeast area, who we even looked at it and x-rayed that in future, in the next 10, 15 years, we are going to have probably a more deadlier Boko Haram, because the stigmatization might come out is that the problem is that Al-Qaeda and Boko Haram, they will start calling them, because they might not even know their parents. Because some of them, their mothers were raped, and then they got pregnant without knowing who their fathers were. And so, in effect, it's a very delicate situation that the governor must have to look at. You have to look at what experts, and it's not rocket science. People have done it in the past. We'll look at how other countries have handled those situations, and we'll see how we can bring our own peculiar local situation into it and look at a way out to handle it. If not so, it's just going to be probably what some people might just call a piece of the graveyard, which will just boomerang immediately there is something. So we shouldn't do a cosmetic thing. It has to be an academic thing that has been proven. It has to be studied. It has to be looked at. There has to be profiling of those people. There has to be justice to the victims. There has to be training and reintegration. There has to be psychological treatment too for those victims. And like you rightly pointed out, sometimes they are treated highly, better than those who suffered, who are the victims. So there must be a way of looking at the victims. We even saw too during that period that there are so many displaced people who are not even in camps. So when they were counting the number of people in camps, like the Sheikh of Rotola himself, he attended that seminar. He said even inside Maiduguri alone, there were about 2 million displaced people, because relations, friends, and the rest provided succor for them. And so those people are not usually counted in the camps. Some came down to Jos, some are in Abuja, and all over the country. And so if you are going to do a holistic thing, you have to look at the way that you provide succor for everybody. including those who are not counted. If not, you still have a society that is going to be divided, a society that will feel hurt, the victims will continue to feel hurt, and those who are supposed to be behind jail will be enjoying and reaping the fruit of rebellion and being insurgents who have killed people. So I agree with the governor, but it is not an insurmountable thing. He has to do some studies, like he has met the chief of defense staff. I think he can get some of our recommendations in our publication, the constructive engagement of the National Defense Alumni Association of National Defense College, in the Defense College at the Andex Secretariat. We have those publications that detail all the outcomes of the seminar and the recommendations, which will be helpful. And he can get some other people who will help along to provide some solutions to that. I think that's what he needs to do for now.
Okay, thank you so much, General John Temlong. Let me now join Dr. Kabir Adamu, Security Risks Management Expert, who is joining us via Zoom. Mr. Kabir, it is quite an achievement, yes? Now our guests have outlined and brought up some pertinent issues. Surrendering without your weapons. Can these surrendered insurgents be trusted? What's your take on that from the security angle?
Thank you very much, and good morning, Nigeria. I think this is a very significant stage in the counter-insurgency operation that Nigeria is waging. 12 years into the operation, and we are having this significant development. It's a very good time for Nigerians to say thank God and to also appreciate the efforts of the Nigerian military, of course, and of the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, President Muhammadu Buhari. All of this is captured under what is called countering violent extremism. It is an approach to counterinsurgency that envisages such developments where the other side, that's the side that the state is fighting, would surrender. And so under that effort, you have three components that are very important to this conversation. One of them is what is called strategic communication, where the Nigerian state will communicate to both Nigerians and the world on the counterinsurgency operations. In other words, repentant, as it were, terrorists, why are they surrendering? What is the objective of their surrendering? What advantages does their surrendering have through strategic communication? And for that instance, I would like to commend NTA for even having this program, because it is an aspect of strategic communications. Nigerians will listen to it and they will understand why these groups are surrendering. Now, having said that, the other two components that are important to this conversation are what is called counter-radicalization and then de-radicalization. Now, just to put it in layman's terms, one of the reasons why these terrorists are being conscripted is ideological. They've embraced a version of Islam that allows them to strap bombs on themselves to go and kill people. Now, all of a sudden, the assumption, and I say this with a sense of responsibility, the assumption is that they have renounced this ideology, and so they are coming into the fold of society in order to live as normal persons. And that places on us the moral burden whether to accept them or not to accept them. And I know the other guests have spoken about this subject. But the good thing is, like I said, we already anticipated this. So we have Operation Safe Corridor. Now, I don't want to go into the discussions on why Operation Safe Corridor is not the institution that is receiving this group, because ideally that is what it should be. Operation Safe Corridor should receive them, put them through this counter-radicalization effort, so that at the end of a period, say 1 year, 6 months, they will be evaluated on the basis of whether they have renounced this ideology or not before they are released into the society. Now, the third point, which is de-radicalization, for me is absolutely important. The estimate of the number of terrorists that are in the Lake Chad Basin is about 9,000, and we're speaking of both the Islamic State in West Africa province and the Jamaat al-Ahl Sunnah lil-Dawati wal-Jihad. Now, if out of 9,000, you have 1,500 surrendering or thereabout, it means the number of foot soldiers that this group has reduced significantly. And that means the Nigerian army is now battling a lesser enemy. Now, even a primary school student know that this is something that you should be happy about. Less enemies to fight, and it means you are at least gaining some progress, or in some instances, you can even say winning this war, as it were. However, because that first point that I have made has not been managed properly, Nigerians unfortunately don't understand it. And so I'm seeing a lot of criticism. And I'm sorry to say, even unfortunately from government officials that are very high up there, they see the development, but they don't understand how to interpret it. So that is where strategic communication comes in, where all the arms of government that are involved in communication should be able to communicate this to Nigerians in a manner that Nigerians will support the counterinsurgency operation, so that at the end of the day, would have all of Nigeria supporting it, and then, of course, and that would help in winning the hearts and minds of the population. Now, having said that, some of the issues that came up with the other guests is the issues around why we are pampering this repentant terrorist. And again, that is where strategic communication has failed. President Buhari created the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management, and what else, headed by Malama Sadia. Now, that ministry has the sole objective of meeting the needs and requirements of, as it were, victims of terrorism, of course, and victims of other conflicts that are in the country. And currently, it is what is called the super ministry, because frankly, it has the highest budget in the country. And so I think it's unfair. It is actually not appropriate if we now say that these victims of terrorism are not being attended to, when specifically a ministry has been created to attend to them. Now, whether through monitoring and evaluation measures and mechanisms, that ministry is meeting its objectives, that's not the remit for me to discuss here. It's left for experts in monitoring and evaluation to measure that. But in terms of structures that government has attempted to put in place, I think government has done well in terms of its attempt to meet the needs of the victims of this terrorism. And incidentally, under that ministry, or at least an aspect of it, is the Northeast Development Commission that has its specific responsibility to develop aspects of the Northeast. Again, that is another component of this CVE that I spoke about. For anyone interested in the CVE, it's a component that is being managed by the Office of the National Security Advisor, even though unfortunately the military appears to have a face in that component. Ideally, it should be the Office of the National Security Advisor. And the last time I checked, there are about 12 or more government ministries, departments, and agencies that have responsibility in this CVE component. So I'll stop here. Perhaps in the course of the conversation, I'll expand on one or more aspects of what I've said.
So, Kabir Adamu. Well, let's look at these issues he raised. The successes being recorded at the moment is as a result of what the military call Hadinkai, and that's the operation they are, engaging in, having to have a synergy among themselves, and then attacking these terrorists and taking the fight to their enclaves, and so we have this positive development. Kabir Adamu raised, this pertinent question, which invariably he didn't ask it anyway, but let me just put it to you.
Right.
There seem to be, these structures on the ground. OPSC, Operation Safe Corridor, is there. Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs is there. Northeast Development Commission is there. Borno State Government is there. All right, the non-governmental organizations are there. Now, these are supposed to be structures that are in place that are supposed to deal with this issue of surrender, or the surrendering, Boko Haram terrorists. Do you see that synergy playing out? Or, I don't know, how do you feel about these structures? Are they really working?
I think they are if they are not. They will if they have not been doing that. Because we are now having a conversation at the very early stage of the surrendering. And usually it will take, time for the various agencies and departments or even committees of government created for that purpose to be able to take control of that. But at this stage, they are still with the law enforcement, because you still have to run them through a processing period. You still have to extrapolate information from them. And that's where the issue of intelligence is relevant, because just because somebody comes out of the
I'm
bush.
not interjecting here, but I really want to point out the fact that
Right.
Operation Safe Corridor has been there for 2-3 years now.
Right.
It has been doing what, Kabir Adam mentioned, deradicalization and the rest
Right.
of these counterinsurgency measures.
Because I do not have the facts of the modus operandi of that Operation Safe Corridor, but I trust in the Nigerian military, and I trust in their operation. In fact, the reason why we are having a conversation today that the Boko Haram terrorists are surrendering is because of the successes of the military. But it does not stop at the militarization point of view. And that's why I think that Kabiru has outlined various forms and ways by which they will be processed and dealt with. But it seems most of our conversation, except if, like he said, in strategic communication, we have not been given the proper information as to the procedure they are taking in dealing with them. The natural impression that an average Nigerian has is that these individuals are being received like foreign envoys to the country, which I think sends a very bad signal to the people, because it then gives the people the impression the best way to have the attention of government is to commit heinous crimes. Now, if you look at it from the criminal justice point of view, the fact that people come out of the bush and say they've surrendered does not obfuscate the relevant laws. We have Terrorism Prevention Act, and the offenses committed under the act are punishable by the provisions of the act. Then the question you ask yourself, the fact that they've surrendered, does it then again take away the provisions of the law? Because evidently, two things the government will have to do. Number one, either to reach a plea bargain with them, and then the volume of intelligence they provide now determines how you deal with the crimes that each and every one of them committed, how you're going to deal with it. And then, secondly, you will mitigate the offense that is being committed. So, for example, if you are going to charge them for the highest form of crime, that the punishment will be death. If they provide intelligence that is very relevant, I'm talking about usable intelligence, not telling us what we already know, telling us the details of the act. And that's why I like what the general said. He said they are saying they've repented, but have they surrendered their arms? These are the details you look at. A truly repentant person will bring out those the evidence of his crime. And then it will give you intelligence that will lead to their modus operandi, where is their next operation, what are the dimensions they are taking, because it's asymmetric, it takes different dimensions. And my suspicion, and I do not want that the government should take it as a suspicion, but this is what intelligence does. No information to the intelligence agencies is wasted. Even when you're making noise, it's important to them, because they want to know what is the foundation of the noise that you're making. The question I'm actually raising, and it's because if you look at the world and you look at the activities of insurgents around the world, we are just talking about the Afghanistan issue. So they metamorphose. Once the heat is on them, they change their modus. So what we don't know, since they are coming out, they say that's why the idea of processing is very, very important. And you determine that by the useful information you get. Otherwise, you will integrate them, whether they are in detention camp or in the society. They are now able to come lawfully, so to speak, into the society to then collect intelligence. You must take away all means of electronic devices from them. So the conversation is like you're pampering them, when in actual fact, they should be out of circulation. Because you have to have enough time, and I'm not talking about 1 month or 2 months or 6 months, to be able to get in detail why are they suddenly surrendering. Under international humanitarian law, there are grounds for which people surrender. So, for example, most of their armies are injured. You will see them saying they are handing off. They were no longer interested in the battle. Or you've taken away their command and control center. They can no longer operate. They say, okay, we are surrendering. Or you've killed their commanders. There must be a degree of injury you have inflicted on them, based upon which they are making up their mind. In this case, suddenly you heard. But before they confess that they are going to surrender, I have heard, at least I've read on social media, how that the Nigerian army are urging them to surrender. Then on another occasion, we heard the government of Borno State is also urging them to surrender. I know, based on the ideology of radicalization, they cannot just wake up from sleep and then come out of the bush and say we are surrendering. So are they coming, and not all of them, are they coming to collect intelligence? One, are they truly surrendering? Two, so we shouldn't be talking about pampering at this stage we should treat them with cautious optimism until you are able to extract from them information. And the volume and the quality of information you get will determine whether the person has repented. I can't come to you and say, I've changed my ways. I'm no longer smoking. I'm no longer fighting. And then all I'm saying is that I've changed. You ask me, so what have you changed from? I tell you I've changed. So in what area can I prove that you are not going to do what you're used to doing? You see me from tomorrow. Definitely the information I'm giving you will not be satisfactory. But if I come to you and I start giving you facts that your intelligent people can then verify in the operations of the individual, then you will see that as genuine change. These are areas that I believe they are very vital.
Yes, indeed, they are very vital, and it is known that this was also achieved through collective efforts by the military, through massive campaign, jingles sponsored by the military, and advocacy by Islamic scholars and family members. I'll now join Kakashewu Lawan to ask him how it was processed and how did you go about it that led to the surrender of these insurgents. What other processes did you use apart from militarization?
Well, thank you very much. Now there are a number of processes that were used in urging the terrorists to lay down surrender. One of such process or one of such factors that led to their surrender was the massive campaign embarked upon by our gallant armed forces by reaching a medical outreach to IDP camps, and there they talk in a very civil language, urging them that those of them that are in the bush can equally lay their arms, come out, and then they will not be killed. Some of them do listen to this. The governor of Borno State is also in the forefront of calling on the terrorists in the bush to lay down their arms and surrender to the government. And he has equally said, whoever that lay down his arm, return to the security agencies and surrender himself, would be treated with human dignity. Thereby, some of them have listened to this call. Well, some of them that were rescued by the Nigerian military after an offensive operation were also I am now talking about those that were held captive, were treated with human dignity. So having seen that their wives and children were treated fairly by the military as well as the government of Nigeria, some of them felt, yes, if we surrender, we are going to be treated in the same manner. Now, a number of them were surrendered because there was heat on them by both the military as well as the opposing sect, that is the conflict between ISWAP and JAS, just like rightly posited by Malan Kabiru. The conflict that led to the death of Shekau between the Islamic State of West African Province and Jama'atu al-Sunnah Lidawatu wal-Jihad made some of them to surrender because the heat that is on them from the Nigerian military is enormous. If you leave the Timbuktu Triangle, for example, to the shores of the Lake Chad, you are leaving entirely a territory that is dominated by JAS to another territory that is fully dominated and controlled by ISWAP. That you are not going to. The enemies must clash and fight themselves, which is also to the advantage of the Nigerian military. So these and other factors actually made them to surrender. And what I want to reiterate here is, despite the fact that they are coming out in large numbers, they are being profiled. One thing they said, they don't want to be taken directly into custody by the military, which the military receives them, they profile them, and the next point after profiling is not to go and detain them in military detention facility. They are to be taken to this Operation Safe Corridor for de-radicalization, just like Malan Kabiru said. In that Operation Safe Corridor, we had caused to graduate some badges. I was there personally to interact with them. Islamic clerics were there to preach to them what the Holy Book says about living peacefully with one another. Some of them are truly remorseful after going the radicalization process. But this thing is not, just like Daniel Bola said, something that can be done within a short period of time. It has to be holistic. The radicalization camp for now is in Gombe. We received some repentant Boko Haram sometime last year in Mora under the Multinational Joint Task Force. They were ferried down to Maiduguri. The agreement we had with them, I represented the governor, sat with them, with the commander Multinational Joint Task Force. They told us if they are not treated badly, some of their colleagues will surrender. Now, our agreement was to ferry them directly after profiling to Operation Safe Corridor. But somewhere along the line, they were kept in a facility for almost 8 months. That halted the surrendering of some of them. So there has to be sincerity of purpose. We are not saying they should not be treated fairly. They should be treated fairly so that we reduce the number of enemy, and after having security experts and opinion leaders to discuss on the ways and means of bringing down this insurgency to the barest minimal, then something that has to follow, something that has to do with the law and justice would follow. Transitional justice is very important. We are not free. Just like my friend Bola said, we can mitigate punishment for them. Rather than killing them, we can sentence them to terms of imprisonment. Or, after all, considering all these things, there also shall be a true reconciliation between victims and the terrorists. Maybe by doing this thing, we can have a leeway in reducing this thing to the barest minimal.
Thanks, Kakasho. Brigadier General John Temlong, let's dig a little deep into this dilemma to see how we can come out of it successfully. Talking about the Operation Safe Corridor against the background of what Kakasho said and how these, repentant militants were received, and the negative story about how some of them could stay up to around months, 6 months, 8 months in a facility that was not, the OPSC, facility. This issue of de-radicalization of these militants, and indeed the effect of that on the society they are going to go back to, is one aspect we are looking at. The other aspect is the community itself that will receive them. These are two dilemmas, these are two extreme sides that need to be looked at very well before we can really get out of this dilemma. What do you say as a leeway, or rather a pathway in between these two in trying to, get off this hook?
Thank you very much. First of all, let me address one issue that Kaka said. I think it will be wrong for us to accept the surrendered terrorists in their own terms. No. If that is what is going on, it shouldn't be. But the state government should please listen to the military and let the military handle these terrorists. Because I'll tell you from my own experience, when the Nigerian terrorists, rebels, the FDR Tubo rebels surrendered, the terms was that they should surrender to me. But they went directly and surrendered to the Nigerian government. And the Nigerian government, instead of referring them to us, they didn't. At the end of the day, we were left with a greater problem, because prior to that, the Nigerian government had armed the Fulani militia, the Fulani milice, to defend themselves with military-grade weapons. And it was the Fulani people who are now sustaining that militia force. But when we came and hit them hard and they surrendered, there was a credible force around. And so the Fulani stopped sustaining their own militias. And those militias had their own weapons, military-grade weapons supplied by the Nigerian government, with them in their hands. And so they started spilling into Nigeria, where you had Kwanta with some accents, French accent or foreign accents, along all our roads, reaching almost up to the one that they attempted, the governor of Benue. So we had a greater problem. So I think we should handle this thing properly and professionally, because the end state of government to the military was that they should, and I believe that was my own strategic objective, was that I should defeat the threat, to restore the territorial integrity and restate civil administration in the areas that were under their control. And I believe it will be the same thing here too. So they shouldn't give conditions for their surrender. No. They should come out, they will be treated in line with international laws, just like Barrister Boala has said. Nigeria is a signatory to the international humanitarian law, so we have been fighting and treating them that way. So we should do that one. Let's take that one seriously before we start creating serious other problems. They will surrender. As the heat is coming up, they will surrender. Are they communicating with their colleagues when they tell you that if they're treated well? How will their colleagues know that they are treated well or not? Do they have a means of communication with their colleagues in the bush? And are you monitoring that communication to make sure that what they are communicating is not passing intelligence? I think there is more to that, which has to be done properly by the professional military. So I think that's my caution, and I think that it should be taken seriously. The other aspect we said, the Operation Safe Corridor itself, like you said, is not a purely military affair. What the military does is to provide the facilities, provide the security, and then have their own intelligence too, who are trained, either psychologists, clinical psychologists, and then the operatives, to get some of the information that they want. There are international NGOs and governments that are involved in the de-radicalization process. And so it's funded too. And so once that is done, it should be done simultaneously with the victims. There has to be something done for the victims. We brought that out clearly in our national security seminar, that the victims themselves have to undergo some psychological treatment too, because they are under serious trauma. Before you bring them together, they would have reached a level that there has to be some forgiveness and there has to be some repentance. So you just don't come and put them together, and we have talked about this transitional justice issue. I'll give you an example. A young chap was seen, I think he was about 10 or so years old, in a IDP camp. And they asked him, what are you going to do when you grow up? What do you want to do when you want to grow up? And his answer was to kill Boko Haram. At that age, that was his mindset, because he has seen how Boko Haram has traumatized him and made him homeless, probably killed his parents, himself lost no other relations. So what he is growing up with is to grow up and revenge the murder or the treatment of, by the Boko Haram to his parents or his community. You have people who are the richest. The mode of even moving out of those communities, those who even abandoned their communities, were different. Some were in the prayer ground, some were in mosques, some were in churches when their communities were overrun, so they ran. Some were able to move out some of their things out before they overran their communities. So you could see at a time the richest people in the community sometimes become paupers. And then you have another set of people who are traumatized them, coming back, being rehabilitated, and given take-off grants, and they become the rich people in the community, the influential people in the community. So it's a very delicate thing. It has to be handled simultaneously, and you must provide for the victims. And those victims too must be able to forgive and let go. But then for them to forgive and let go too, you must provide something for them to live on. Because if he goes back and forgives and he has no absolute means of livelihood to live the way he is, the greatest thing is that he will be looking at those persons with this. In the smallest opportunity you have, he will turn the tide on the other person. So we need to handle it seriously in a better way. And we need to move those people away, because the state government do not have the capacity and the wherewithal to keep those number of people and keep them under and secured. They can escape from there. How are you going to do it? Are you going to use police? So you need to take them to a secure environment. What the US did was to move some of those people to Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, where they couldn't even escape. So you need to do that. You need to move them away from Maiduguri to Gombe or to some other locations. And then from there, you start the profiling, you separate them, and then you start the de-radicalization process. I think the military offensive is quite effective. They're understanding the language that Mr. President said they should speak the language that they understand. And that's the why they're coming out. But the objective is that you want them to come back because they are Nigerians. You are not going to annihilate them. Because if you do that, you are going against international humanitarian. The laws of war do not allow that. The laws of war do not allow you to kill a surrendered combatant. So you have to treat them according to the laws. But while treating them according to the laws, your national security must come up first. And that way, you still want to integrate them and make them citizens because they are citizens. Unfortunately, we have a dilemma again in this country, is that you don't know who is a Nigerian, especially in those areas. We don't have ID cards for them. There are no data. So somebody living in the lake on the Cameroonian or Chadian or Nigerian side that joined Boko Haram comes in here and fight. They speak the same language because they speak almost the same language around there, Kanuri, Buduma, and the rest. And so when he comes in here, you say he's a Nigerian. And so you keep him as a Nigerian too. So these are very complex issues. And I believe that the National ID Card project was up. It's so unfortunate that this thing has been jinxed for a long time. That we must get this National ID Card. It's a very national security infrastructure that is important that you have. That all our citizens must be captured in the database. You have their biometric and you have their ID cards. That those who are foreigners, you know. Those who are locals, you know. As it is now, if all of them speak Kanuri, speak Fulfulde, speak Buduma, and the rest, what do? They are Nigerians. As far as they say they are Nigerians, whereas they're not Nigerians. And you are going to treat them the same way as Nigerians. So I think we need to, it's quite a complex thing. It's not just a matter of theory now, but this is a matter of practical. That this is the reality that we have on ground. That we have to handle this thing professionally in a way that national security of Nigeria is uppermost. And to get these people back as good citizens of this country, that will be the only way that we can get it out. Thank you.
Indeed, General Temlong, thank you so much for your response, and you've raised some, pertinent questions. We're in a dicey situation in Borno right now, and I believe most people would not like to be in the shoes of Governor Zulum. He's in between the deep blue sea and the devil. Let me now join Kabir Adamu. You outlined, so many issues here. You talked about strategic communication, de-radicalization, counter-radicalization, and the NEDC. Let's talk about the NGOs that have been in Maiduguri for a very long time. What kind of role do you think they will be able to play in stabilizing and, bringing people out of the trauma of the insurgency in Maiduguri? I, for one, living there all through the insurgency, I know what I go through day in, day out, waking up in sweat at times, in nightmares. How will people be able to overcome all these kind of things that happened? You can't even describe it. Where do we begin from?
Thank you, Malama Jumai. My heart goes out to everyone that has been in the last 12 years the recipient of the consequences of the insurgency, not just in the Northeast, but across the Lake Chad Basin and across the country. Before answering your question directly, one point that I think has come out from all the discussants is the need for improved coordination between the federal and state government. What appears to me from this conversation is that the federal government has a lot of policies that it doesn't seem to me the state government is either fully aware of or has been involved in. I mentioned the countering violent extremism framework, That framework was launched in 2018 or 2019, if I remember very well. And one of our advice then was that it should be taken to the state governments, because frankly, people are in the states, not at the federal level. So if you bring up such a beautiful policy and you don't take it down to the states, then it means people will not even be aware. And unfortunately, that's where we are. So that's one huge sort of recommendation. I'm hoping that those that are driving the policy implementation in the various departments, including the Office of the National Security Advisor, let them reach out to the state governments and introduce all of these beautiful concepts to them so that they can help in the implementation of those concepts. Now, having said that, with regards to your specific question, the answer is in psychosocial support. And I'm very delighted to mention that several non-governmental organizations, both national, that's local, as well as international, have been involved in this psychosocial support, where they help in reducing the impact and the consequences of the counterinsurgency issues to the various populations. There are so many things, starting from deprivation to debt, to name them, that impact people, and that unfortunately, as a country, we are not attending to. But a lot of these non-governmental organizations have been doing an amazing work. Another aspect is documentation. Unfortunately, as a country, that's an area that we are not so good at, to document issues. And I know a lot of non-governmental organizations, including governmental ones like the UN as an example, they support a lot in that regard. Because frankly, how can you plan when you don't even have the number of the victims as an example, or those that have been impacted by these issues? So again, this is another area. And I must commend the Borno state government. It has been amazing in terms of its effort in coordination, in bringing both the government side and the non-governmental organization side. Borno State has a development plan. It has set up a ministry of, I can't remember the designation very well, but something to do with coordination. And it has appointed persons with huge expertise in that field that are coordinating between government policies and the non-governmental organizations. Because the danger, and that's what we have seen in the past. At the last count, there were over 100 international non-governmental organizations in Borno. Now, if you don't coordinate their activities, it means there will be duplication of efforts. It means, unfortunately, sometimes you'll be subverting government effort. So what the Borno state government did was to create that ministry and then to enhance coordination. And that has really helped in terms of the delivery of some of these issues like the psychosocial support. Then let's not even forget the development effort itself, as well as the humanitarian effort. A lot of NGOs are involved in that. And this humanitarian effort has a range. Sometimes it's subsumed under the acronym WASH, where you have to do with water, hygiene, sanitation, name them. So a lot of that is being done at the level of the state government. Like I said at the beginning, what I think is absolutely important is to enhance coordination between the federal and state government so that we can have an instrument, a kind of mechanism where we have monitoring and evaluation, and that you can now look at where you are. And then in the next 6 months, next 12 months, you are able to evaluate what you've been able to achieve. That, I think, is the missing gap. Remember, we have a national counterterrorism strategy, and I know General Tenglong can speak better on that strategy, but I am not aware that in the last couple of years, we have evaluated that strategy to ask the critical question: where are we? What have we done rightly? What have we done wrong? Why is it that it's only the military that is bearing the face of the counterinsurgency operation? When in the alternative, when I looked at that national counterterrorism strategy, it should be a whole of government and not just the military. So a lot of these things, unfortunately, are not as easy as it sounds. But I believe that the conversations like this, interrogations like the ones that we're having, will help us go back to the original objectives of some of these policies and documentations that have been arrived. But in summary, non-governmental organizations are playing a critical role in counterinsurgency operations, including this countering violent extremism framework that I've mentioned. In fact, when the Office of the National Security Advisor launched it, one of the first things it did was to invite what it calls stakeholders, including non-governmental organizations, our diplomatic partners, named them, and they came for a meeting. It introduced the framework to them, and I know they supported the framework. Just to give you an example, we've been talking about the Operation Safe Corridor. Most of the monies that the Nigerian government got to operate that Operation Safe Corridor came from our foreign partners. So that's some of the roles that these non-governmental organizations have been playing so far.
Oh, well, many thanks, Dr. Kabir Adamu. Kabir Adamu is a security expert and security risk management expert, that is. So thank you so much for your insights this morning. On a final note, we're running short of time. Bola, maybe in 30, 45 seconds, what would be your parting comments on this dilemma, given the fact that it has assumed some international dimension too? Because I learned some of them surrendered in Cameroon.
Right. First of all is to really salute the effort of the military, the federal government, and especially Borno State. Otherwise, the governor would have politicized it by just showing excitement and not, raising germane issues. But for him to have done that, it is something that is what commendable. My only final advice will be that these surrendered terrorists should be taken out of the Northeast, which is what in law we call locus inquo, the place of operation or the place of the commission of the crime. Because if you keep them there, they are definitely going to, some of them who are probably serving as spies might give useful information that will take us backward. So taking them out of the Northeast, you can bring them to North Central and then do all of these processes will be very helpful.
Okay, thank you so much, Daniel Bala, legal practitioner, adjunct lecturer and arbitrator, as well as analyst on legal affairs, both nationally and internationally. Let me now join Kakashehu in Maiduguri to ask him which way forward, what's next, with the overwhelming numbers that are ready to surrender now. In 30 seconds, tell us what the government is putting on ground to absorb these people that are coming out, and what will you be able to, how can you differentiate between those who have been forced and those who were in Boko Haram willingly? How would you be able to do that to secure Borno State once again?
Thank you very much. Let me first of all create clear one impression. State government has never negotiated and or sat with terrorists to surrender to them. It is directly between the terrorists and the military. We only facilitate. When I said we went to Mora, the first we agreed. The agreement was between the first commander and then the coordinator Operation Safe Corridor. So we have never, as a state government, agreed to terms with terrorists. This, because General Chenlong said he wants to advise the state government. We have never done that, and we can never do this. Secondly, I agree with him that we don't have the capacity to receive these terrorists and keep them here. The federal government has to come in and do something about this. I agree with him entirely. Then thirdly, he said it is very difficult to distinguish between Nigerians and non-Nigerians. To some extent, yes, but the essence, we have immigration officers that are part of this process that are screening. The Kanuri that is spoken in Nigeria and that of Niger and Chad are quite different. So with expertise from the immigration service, even without ID card, they can do the needful. Then now to your question. Borno State government is willing and is ever ready to do all that it will take within the limited resources at the disposal of government to ensure that Borno is secured and these people are taken out of Maiduguri to wheresoever the federal government designated for their de-radicalization. We are ever ready to support the military and all other stakeholders to ensure that Nigeria get rid of this insurgency. Thank you very much.
Kakashehu Lawal, Attorney General and Commissioner for Justice, Borno State, thank you so much for coming on the program and shedding light on what is happening in Maiduguri, which is indeed a great achievement, and we hope it will get better. And Brigadier General John Temlong, First Commander, Multinational Joint Task Force, former President of Alumni Association of National Defense College and Security Consultant, thank you so much for coming on Good Morning Nigeria. As always, we appreciate your input. We'll take a break now.